All right, I think we are live now. Just I don't know, say something if you guys can hear me, because let's see here. All right, I think you guys can hear me. I'm assuming you guys can hear me. Say if you can hear me or not. I just want to make sure that it's good on my end. Okay, that's good. I was kind of worried there for a second because I didn't want to mess with anything. So I'm gonna have this Q&A for about an hour or so. So send in your questions. I'll try to answer any. I'm not gonna answer weird questions, but I'll answer questions that I think are not trollish questions, of course. JMD, are you gonna debate Jeff? I don't know who that is. I've never heard of that guy. So I have no idea who Jefferson, whatever. I don't even know what his last name is. I can't even pronounce it. So if I don't know who he is, I can't debate him. So, I mean, that's kind of the whole issue. But, you know, it is what it is. All right, fine. I'll put your question up. Well, second best philosopher. No, Isaac is. I don't think Isaac is a philosopher. He's a internet troll. That's my view of him, anyways. But you know, it is. You know, it is what it is. So. Let's see. Why is I don't know. Probably because Matt doesn't have a PhD. Because anytime Craig debates someone that doesn't have a PhD, it doesn't end well for them most of the time. So that's probably my guess. Like you're not going to really have any debates with Craig unless you yourself have some sort of high degree, like the same level as Craig. And I think Craig has made this point very obvious, that you have to go to school, you have to like learn the subject in order to like have an actual debate. Now there are a few people that have been the exception, of course, but I think I think Craig is not going to debate someone like Matt because Matt is not someone that properly understands philosophy that well. I mean, you can just kind of watch his videos, and I think you'll see why. Now, of course, I think he makes some fair points, but I think overall, I don't think Craig's gonna be able to do that. So let's see. Matter. I'm agnostic on that. I'm actually, because I'm not sure if I'm leaning towards meteorological nihilism, but I'm not sure if there could be something. I don't know. I think there's a lot more questions than answers to that sort of view. I'm open to the possibility that matter could be defined as things with constitutes parts, but it really depends on what exactly you mean. So, yeah. What do you think? Presuppositionalism. Well, I have a lot to say on that, so this might be a long answer, but presuppositionalism I think is terrible as a methodology. And I don't mean that in a I'm not over exaggerating. I think it's an absolute horrible method. It almost never works. And it presupposes you're using circular reasoning in your own epistemology. So it's not really something that I would advise any Christian apologist to use. And I would not, I think in order to really understand why presuppositionalism doesn't work, you have to study epistemology. You have to understand how beliefs are formed. Otherwise, you're not going to really understand why it's such a problem. So I think it's a terrible epistemology. I think it doesn't really work. And when you examine the arguments within it, it's basically just assuming your own conclusion. And that's not what we should do. If we're seekers of truth, we should not assume our conclusion. We should search for the evidence. So again, I would just advise that Christians study epistemology the proper way and not fall into this trap of presuppositionalism. What is your favorite Hermetic law? Probably the principle of mentalism would be my favorite, because that principle kind of unpack, like it can't really, like it's the most important principle, right? So I think the first principle is the most important, and you can't really have the other principles without it. So I would say that's probably my favorite, because it really unpacks the whole metaphysics of how all of Hermeticism works. It's like what defines all the other principles. You can't really have any other Hermetic principle without the first principle. So without the first principle, if the first principle is not true, then all the others fall apart. It's like if you're building, let's say if you're like building a building, like the first principle is the foundation. If you take away the foundation, the whole thing collapses. So that's why I think the first principle of Hermeticism is the most important one. So why do you take? I don't know. I can't answer that question. I'm just, I take man's word over God's word, because I can do it. I don't, that's a hard question. I can't answer that question, because I do take man's word over God's word, and I don't know why I do it, but I just do it because I can. That's just my answer. That's my answer, that's my answer to your question. So yeah, that's all I gotta say about that. But all right, we have an interesting question from Benjamin. Philosopher Humeer says that time is eternal and your life, repeat a beginning of something requires a transition from a time without it. There cannot be a transition from a time without time. I think it would depend on the philosophy of time that you hold to. So if you hold the A theory, for example, you would just say that each transition kind of, like you're in one transition and then it's only real within that moment, and you go to the next moment and the next moment, and it's all each moment of time is real, right? Now, if you were to apply B theory to this, then it's a little complicated, because then every moment of time is real, even if you're not experiencing it all at once. So I think it's eternal in the sense it could be eternal if you're talking about B theory of time. I'm not sure if it's eternal in A theory of time. But I think there are interesting arguments for that. And I would also point out that just because something is eternal, like let's just assume that time is eternal for a second. That doesn't mean that therefore it's necessary, right? So the question is there an explanation that explains why something's eternal? Right. And I think this is a point that Joshua Razmin brings up in his book. Just because something's eternal doesn't mean that it's necessary, right? It doesn't mean it necessarily has to exist, because anything that's eternal needs to have some explanation. And so we're still going to have a contingency problem. And that's why I think I like the more modern, like I like Josh's newer arguments for theism, because I think they really show that even if the universe is eternal, you're still going to have an explanation for why it's eternal, and that would, of course, you can turn that into a contingency argument. So that's kind of my that's why. Okay, why have you been acting? I'm not well, first of all, I'm not an atheist. I just want to point that out. I'm not an atheist. I think that's pretty obvious. However, depends on what you mean by liberal, because I would consider myself a classical liberal, but of course, some people would call that a conservative. But I don't. Even then, I don't really consider myself a conservative. I'm more of an independent. I think the whole political thing is, I think it's, in my opinion, I think most of it's a bunch of nonsense. But my political views about things are pretty much in the middle, so I'm more of a centrist, if I'm going to be honest. But I do think that there are good points that I think both liberals and conservatives make in their arguments. For example, I'm just going to give just two examples real quick, and then we'll go to the next question. So one thing I do not agree with conservatives on is climate change. I think there's a lot of evidence for it. I think that it's been established. And I think conservatives need to concede that point. When it comes to what I disagree about the liberals on is abortion. I think that abortion is immoral. I think that abortion should be outlawed completely. So there are things that I would not agree with on both sides, but there's also things I do agree with on both sides. So again, it really depends on what you mean by liberal, but my politics is probably more centrist than anything. So but yeah. Okay. So I've been reading up on Vang, Tang, and Clark, and I've seen presuppositionalism work in various evangelical situations. Maybe it wouldn't work in a formal debate. Well, yes, I would grant that it could work if you're just evangelizing, especially if you're talking with people that don't know a lot about epistemology. But I think if you're talking with more people, like if you're talking with someone that actually understands philosophy pretty well, it's not going to work on them, because like they know the material, they know it, they've studied it, and they know that the method doesn't work. So it could work for a general population, but trying to make it work within a philosophical realm doesn't work. And I think that's a problem. I think the arguments, I think if we want to be apologists or, be philosophers, we have to basically, we have to combine the popular level stuff, but also academic stuff. So make it a really good argument that it's hard to refute even on a philosophical point of view. So presuppositionalism may work on everyday normal people, but then if you study philosophy, it doesn't work at all. So I think if you want to be consistent, I think it's best to use arguments that work within philosophy as well as those that can work with the general public. So, okay. The idea of an abducto adversarium. Yeah, perhaps, maybe. I don't. I don't really use abducto ad absurdum much, but I do think it could work to show the problems within other positions, so other worldviews. So it would depend on what you're using it for. So perhaps you could use it, but it's complicated. So okay, let's see if you have another question. Do you think there are other evidence for Christianity beyond the resurrection? Yes, I do think there are other evidences. Probably not. I don't know if they're as good as the resurrection argument, but I think you could probably point out like prophecy arguments. So if you read Michael Brown, for example, he provides a lot of arguments, and he also responds to a lot of critics regarding that. There's also my model of Christian idealism, which could be considered as an argument for Christianity, because I kind of derive the Christian model of salvation, and I show basically that God would need to be involved in the process, and that only works with Christianity in particular. So I think there are other arguments you can make, obviously. I'm developing a newer argument myself from just my Christian idealism. But I do think other arguments can work, yes. So, all right. You said you're currently in school. What field are you studying? So I'm right now, I'll tell you what my major's in. My major is in liberal arts and humanities. Now, I'm going to actually change that, so I'm not going to do that as a future career. What I'm most likely going to do is I'm going to go into IT and basically work from home, because that's kind of like the new thing now. So my goal is to basically get an IT degree, work from home, and then maybe do YouTube as a side job. So I've been also considering the possibility that YouTube could actually be a side job that I do on the side while I have my actual job. So it really depends. But right now I'm literally just studying liberal arts and humanities. But again, I'm going to change that. So I'm probably going to get into IT stuff, and I'm hoping to eventually get into philosophy as well. So get like an actual philosophy degree. But I don't know. There's a lot of financial problems I would have to go through first before I get to that. It would take a few years before I actually even get started with a degree in philosophy. So again, it really depends. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm going to do. I'm going to get into IT, try to get an online job, and then probably do YouTube on the side. And hopefully in the future, I can get into philosophy. So we'll see. What do you think of De Henley Bart? I've heard of him. I know that he's a universalist. I also know that he's a classical theist. I haven't read any of his books, so I couldn't really give you a solid opinion on him. But I do think that his universalism is very persuasive. I actually used to be universalist about 6 months ago, or 5 or 6 months ago, but then I kind of changed my position. Now I'm kind of agnostic on exactly what happens to those that are in hell. But I do think that he probably has a lot of good arguments for universalism, which I'm willing to look into. So, how confident are you in Christianity? It depends on if we're talking Christianity in terms of Jesus is God. So basically, if we accept my answer to this question is going to be limited. So I'm not going to include things like Catholicism, for example. Like, let's just grant like the basic premises of Christianity. So Jesus resurrected, Jesus is God, the Trinity, all that stuff, and salvation as well. So I would put probably my confidence is probably around 80 to 90%. So I'm not super confident, but I'm also not really doubting it too much. So I do think that my confidence in the Christian worldview specifically is probably around that range. Now, if we're talking about other things, such as my Hermeticism, for example, my Hermetic metaphysics, I think that's probably around 90% or higher. So it really depends on what we're talking about. But basically, I'm more confident that Hermeticism is true than Christianity. But of course, I would say that you can't really have Christianity without my Hermeticism. So I think it's a little complicated, but I do think that Christianity is probably around, again, the 70 to 80% range. And then if we're talking more specifically Hermeticism, the 90% range, and then same thing with idealism would also be around 90%. So that's my answer to that question. But I do think that it's compatible. I've been looking into that, actually. I actually have... Here, I'll show you. Let me get my book real quick. Okay, so I got this, Edward Pfizer, Aristotle's Revenge. I also got Scholastic Metaphysics, and I got this one. So I am considering the possibility that you could combine idealism with Thomism. Now, I don't know exactly how you would combine, let's say, natural law theory. I think that's natural law theory is something I've been less confident in. But I do think, other than that, I think you can make a very strong case for combining idealism with Thomism in a very robust way. So, yeah, I do think that there is definitely it's possible to combine those two ideas into one metaphysics, and that's kind of what I've been working on. But yeah. What do you think of the hilarious collapse of the Islamic worldview? I haven't really looked into Islam that much. If I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't. I know that I know the problems that exist within Islam, especially with the preservation of the Quran, as well as a lot of other issues. For recommendations on that point, I would recommend. Here, let me see if I can actually find it real quick. Hold on. There's a documentary I watched a few years ago that really changed my mind on Islam, that I think Christians need to watch. Hold on, let me see if I can. Let's see. Oh, that's not it. Just give me a second. I'll wait. Okay. I'm gonna leave the link to this video in the live chat. Just give me one moment if I can find it. No, that's not it. Okay, why is it not working? Hold on. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to get this video linked up, and it's being a problem. Let's see here. Where is the documentary? It was like, okay, here it is. Perfect. All right, so I'm gonna leave. All right, give me a second. All right, so I don't know. Okay, so apparently, I guess the link doesn't. I'm not sure if the link would work. But okay, so let me try to. Let me try to tell you guys what it is. So if you look up Islam Debunked documentary on Exegetical Apologetics YouTube channel, it's almost 4 hours long. It's around 3 hours and 42 minutes, but it goes over basically all the main objections to Islam. And if you watch it, it's like every time it adds more and more evidence, you can tell that like Islam just becomes less and less probable as you keep watching. And especially when you get near the end, it's like, wow, okay, Islam is definitely not true because, you have all these issues. And so I think the main problem with Islam is, and then I'll try to get to the next question, but basically my biggest objection to Islam would be simply that a lot of the Quran is actually copied from Gnostic sources. Like if you actually look at the parallels between the Quran and Gnostic sources, which came around the 2nd century, you'll see a lot of copying going on. And there's like direct parallels between those two. And if that's the case, which it is, then Islam is false, because if the Quran is supposed to be perfectly preserved and come from God, well, then why do we see these parallels with Gnostic sources? So that's my biggest objection to Islam, is that when you look at the sources that it uses, it comes from Gnostic sources, which is why I think Islam is most likely false. In fact, I would probably say that Islam is, I would say that atheism is more probable than Islam when you actually like add up all the evidence against it. So I'm not just talking like the argument I just gave, but like every single argument that is against it. I think the probability of Islam is probably lower than atheism. So I think the probability of God not existing is greater than the probability that the probability that Islam is true. So yeah, I think it's I don't think it's rational at all to be a Muslim. But all right, next question. You talk about natural theology. Shouldn't you deal with Oppie's book arguing about gods? Craig said that nobody can say they're successful arguments until deal with Oppie's critics. But yeah, hold on. Let me get Oppie's book real quick. Hold on. Oppie is probably my favorite atheist philosopher. Actually, I have his book right here. I also have his other book called The Best Argument Against God. So Oppie's work, I do admit, it is very challenging. He does present a lot of good responses to theistic arguments. I don't think all of his responses work. However, there are a few that I think he kind of doesn't really give a good argument. But I would say most of the objections he brings up are pretty good. They're pretty fair points. So I do agree that we should read people like Oppie and really take his objections seriously, because obviously those are the best arguments you're going to find against natural theology. However, I want to also point out that my issue with naturalism doesn't really have to do with the lack of explanatory power for naturalism. My issue with naturalism is precisely that naturalism's simpliciter. If you look at naturalism as a simple theory where it's just causal effects or whatever, it doesn't really explain anything, right? It doesn't explain why there's a universe, and you can't get a universe for free under naturalism, right? So it's not like you can just insert a universe and then explain everything from there. No, you need to actually explain why there's a universe in the first place. I don't think naturalism's simpliciter does that. However, I would say that you could have a naturalism that does have explanatory power, but to do that, it would take away its simplicity. So basically, this is kind of what Paul Draper does, where he basically says, or basically admits, that naturalism simpliciter cannot explain everything. However, if we insert the hypothesis of an indifferent universe, then naturalism has explanatory power. It can explain the existence of planets, stars, galaxies, life, stuff like that. So naturalism does have explanatory power, but only at the cost of its simplicity. So basically, the more that you increase naturalism's explanatory power, the less simple it becomes. But then the more simple naturalism becomes, the less explanatory power it has. That's the basic problem with naturalism that I see. Now, theism, on the other hand, doesn't have this problem, because under theism, the basic foundation for reality is perfection. I don't have to posit like arbitrary limits, for example. I could just say that the foundation for reality is perfection, right? And then you explain everything from that perfection. Okay, so this explains why minds exist, why matter exists, like everything that, it explains why everything exists from theism. And it's a simple theory because I'm not putting arbitrary limits on the foundation. I'm also not, it's a simple substance. In this case, it would be perfection. So theism is a simple hypothesis, and it has explanatory power, whereas naturalism, if it is a simple hypothesis, then it lacks explanatory power. But then if it has explanatory power, then it lacks simplicity. So that's the basic issue I see. Now, of course, there are some other issues we can talk about, like whether or not theism and naturalism, when comparing them to, like, let's say, fine-tuning whether or not theism or naturalism can better explain the evidence, or when you look at consciousness, for example, whether or not theism or naturalism can better explain the evidence. But I think, even though I respect Oppie a lot, but I think the arguments, he brings up a lot of good points, but I think overall, when you look at the big picture, I think theism wins, because, again, theism is a simple theory and it has all the explanatory power, whereas naturalism, while you could say that it's a simple theory, if it is simple, it doesn't have explanatory power. But then if it has explanatory power, it's not simple. So that's the problem that I see. But yeah. Okay, so next question. Can there be some truths in atheism? Not overall, but what are the best? Can there be? I feel like this is two questions. Can there be some truth in atheism where there are? Okay, so, I'll try. I don't know if this is one question or two questions, but let me try to get. So, I would recommend the best books on God existence. Here, I'll get them out for you real quick. Hold on. Okay, so I got. Let me just go through each one. I'm not going to use this one because that one's probably. Okay, so we got Coherence of Theism by Richard Swinburne. I recommend this one. Now, for a book on the best argument for God, like the one that I think presents the best case for God, I'd actually recommend two books. So the first one is one by Joshua Razmian. He presents a new argument, which I'm not going to go over here, but he does. And I'll also recommend Richard Swinburne's The Existence of God. Now, this book, I would say, is probably the best book in presenting the best case for theism. Now, of course, he doesn't go over every argument, but he does kind of provide the main arguments and shows why theism has good explanatory power. Now, for the other side of the aisle, probably this one, The Best Argument Against God by Oppie. This is another one that I would highly recommend that people read to kind of get the other side and understand the counter arguments. So there's also, I don't have the book, but there's also called The Miracle of Theism by Mackey that I would also recommend. So those are kind of like the best books to read, on God's existence, whether God does exist or God doesn't exist. I would kind of recommend those ones. And then, of course, as I pointed out earlier, the arguing about gods, I would also recommend people check that out as well. So, okay. So next question. How do you find time to read through philosophy? Your articles on IP articles are well-reasoned. How do you avoid the usual fallacies in your arguments? So for me, I spend around probably an hour a day reading. And I try to read very slowly so I can understand with the material that I'm reading. So basically just sit down, read through it and try to understand the points. Don't read. I would not recommend you read too much in one day because otherwise it's gonna overflow your brain basically. But that's kind of my perspective. Your articles on IP blogs are well reasoned. How do you? Well, basically, what I look over the arguments and I kind of have other people give insight or feedback into what they think, whether or not there's any problems in the arguments, and stuff like that. So again, philosophy, it takes time. You can't do it fast. Like you got to really, when you think about arguments, you got to really sit down and like think about it. You can't just, think about it too fast. So, that's what I would recommend. But yeah. And then let me go to the next question. Okay, do you think that Thomists have a problem with accepting idealism? Given the doctrine of transubstantiation states that while there are no phenomenal change, the Eucharist does become the body of Christ. I would say they can have a problem with it if they don't understand it that well. So transubstantiation is something that I've tried to like wrap my head around it, but the basic doctrine is simply, I think, because I've talked to a lot of Catholics about this before to try to like understand what they mean. And basically the idea is that the blood and the bread are not physically actual, blood and body, but rather there's a real presence there, basically. So it doesn't have to be the case that our perceptions reflect the actual blood and body of Christ. Rather, there's a real presence that's there, even though if we can't perceive it. So I think if you take the idealist perspective, so even if you take my sort of idealism, where I basically see the physical world as like a dream, I could still see how there could be some underlying, real presence of Christ in the bread and wine, but it's not physically there because Christ isn't physically there. There's more of like there's a different kind of presence there. So it's not physically there, right? Because God isn't bound by physical laws, but rather there's a real presence that's there that exists beyond our perceptions, but it's still there. So that's kind of how I would think of it. But again, I think Thomas would just have to understand idealism and what it entails. So yeah, I'm kind of undecided on whether or not transubstantiation is actually true, but I do think that there's more. I think there's better arguments for it than against it, at least when you look at scripture. So yeah. Okay, so it says, what do you think about Bernardo Kastrup and his idealist model? And well, actually, I do have. Let me see. Let me get my book real quick. Okay, so I have Bernardo Kastrup's book right here. I do think his model is incorrect ultimately. So I would agree with his underlying ontology that everything is mental, but I'm not sure because it seems like his model is more deistic. So it doesn't imply Christianity per se, but rather it basically says that the universe is within consciousness, but then this consciousness isn't really, it doesn't really have a relationship with humans, and it doesn't really have any feelings for us, right? So I think it's very much a deistic version of God. So it doesn't imply Christianity, but I think depending on how you put it, it could be compatible with Christianity. So like, let's say it's definitely compatible with like, let's say classical theism, for example, right? So I do think it's compatible with that sort of God, but I'm not sure if it's compatible with like, let's say another version of like, let's say neoclassical theism or, stuff like that. So I think Bernardo Kastrup's model overall is wrong, which is why I'm working on my current series, which is quantum hermeticism, and that's why I'm proposing my own model of God and explaining, the hermetic principles and how they all work together. So yeah. What did you hear about your deleted video? Well, yeah, Kastrup never replied back to my arguments, unfortunately. I'm still waiting for his response to my concerns, but he hasn't yet responded to my objections, which kind of worries me because, I mean, if he's a philosopher, he should be able to at least address my objections or at least concede his argument, but he hasn't responded. So yeah. All right. Let's go to the next question. Idealism. Craig critiqued Oppie by saying that Oppie raises the bar unrealistically while high left found to provide what constitutes. I do agree with Craig that Oppie does put the bar too high. So one of the criteria that Oppie uses for a successful argument is that the opposing side has to agree to the argument. So basically, if I present an argument for God, then it has to convince everybody in the field of philosophy religion, that the argument actually works. And I don't think that's a realistic criteria to be using because people have cognitive biases. No matter how good of an argument is, some people simply aren't going to accept the argument. So I do agree. I think that's one of the other issues with Oppie, that he does raise the bar too high for a successful argument. I do think just because an argument isn't agreed upon by philosophers does not mean that the argument doesn't work. It just means that, there's some, unanswered questions that we should be asking, or maybe there's some cognitive biases going on. So yeah, I would agree that Oppie does raise the bar too high. So yeah. Okay. Many people are being led to a demiurge, platonic, gnostic, masonic worldview through idealism. Why do you think theism better fits with idealism than those views? I would just okay, so to answer this question, I would say idealism is a broad term, right? So there's different types of idealism. However, if we're talking about objective idealism, then I think theism is the best explanation, right? Because let's say if you're a solipsist, for example, obviously you're not going to believe in God, right? Or if you're like Kastrup, for example, Bernardo Kastrup, he's a deist. Now it depends on whether or not theism is deism. Some I've talked to a few atheists actually, and they say that there's a distinction, which I guess there could be, but it really depends on what type of idealism we're talking about. If we're talking idealism in broad terms, then obviously it's compatible with a wide range of different views about reality. There's even some versions of idealism that don't imply theism, right? But if we're talking objective idealism, then I think it would imply, theism. So yeah, okay. Okay, let me see if I can. I'm trying to see if there's any more questions directed to me. Okay. How would you define omnipresent? Like, if hell is separation of God, how is he still omnipresent? Another question, how would you define omnipotent? Omnipresent simply means that God contains reality. So basically, God is not bound by space or time. Now, if we're talking about hell, I've been thinking about this because you do bring up a good point. If hell is separated from God, then how could God still be there? Well, I think what we need to point out here is people that are in hell, it's more of a psychological state. So God could be there, right? But it's probably more in line with how our world works. Like we like God may see us, but we don't actually see God, right? Because God's not, he's omnipresent. He exists everywhere. So I would say that people in hell still ontologically depend on God, but they don't want a relationship with him. So obviously they're not going to want to see him. And that's why people that are in hell are going to basically not going to want to see God. So he's not going to ever reveal himself to them there. So, and then another question is, how would you define omnipotence? Omnipotence would simply mean that God is all powerful. But of course, I want to also point out that there's limitations, right? So God can't violate the laws of logic, for example. God can't God can't do anything evil, for example, because that's against his nature. So I would simply say that God is all powerful. But that doesn't mean, just because he's all powerful does not mean that he could do anything, right? Because you can't, logically speaking, there is no being that can do everything, right? Because that's a contradiction. So I would say omnipotence is simply that God is all powerful and that God can, move planets, let's say, but he can't break the laws of logic. So, and I just want to point out that just because God is all powerful does not mean that he has all abilities. So if you had, like, for example, let me just give one quick example and then I'll move to the next question. But basically, omnipotence is that God is so powerful, but he has limits to his abilities. So if he had, let's say, an ability to contract an infinite number of diseases, well, obviously that's going to take away his power. So he wouldn't have that ability. So again, we need to kind of, just because God is all powerful doesn't mean he has unlimited abilities, right? Because then you're going to have some problems. So yeah. All right, let's see if there's any more questions. Hold on. I'm just scrolling down, seeing if... Okay, I heard that Bertrand Russell became a pseudo-idealist later in his life. I'm actually not familiar with his version of idealism, so it would depend. I haven't looked too much into Bernardo Russell, so I don't actually know what his view would be. I'm assuming that if he ever did become an idealist, he was probably more of an atheistic idealist. So again, it really just depend. But okay, so you should consider Orthodox Christianity. They really do try to stick to traditions. Yeah, I've been looking into that. Like, I'm not, like, for example, I'm not a Protestant. For example, I think Protestantism is not that good. If I'm going to be blatantly honest, I don't think it's good at all. So I do I am considering it. I'm still looking into it. Especially right now, I'm looking into where's the. I don't have it. Wait. Yeah. I have like a bunch of books on my bed, but I can't find the book I actually wanted to show you guys. But sorry, hold on. Let me try to fix this. My camera is not that good. So yeah, I am considering it, but I have to do more research, obviously. So yeah. All right, I'm gonna hold on, guys. I'm gonna see. There, it's my house is crazy right now. I'm gonna try to slow things down a bit. Hold on. Give me a second. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, let's get to the next question. What do you think of Rat's argument? I think. Okay, so I've been looking into it. I've been trying. I wanted to do a video on it myself, but I need to like figure out a way to make it understandable to a layman audience. So I do like the argument, but I think there needs to be clarification because it's really complicated. So if I'm gonna ever do a video on it, I'm gonna try to make it as understandable as I can, basically. So that's kind of what I think. I think it works, but I think it's hard to understand. So yeah. Okay. Okay, so Jacob asked, do you have thoughts on Linda omnisubjectivity? It depends on what you mean by omnisubjectivity. So I think there are a few interesting arguments against omnisubjectivity, especially dealing with, let's say, if someone has, let me just give one weird example, but I think this is a good example. So this is a weird example, but I'm going to have to bring it up because this is probably like something that's really been bothering me. So if we're going to say that God has the feelings of everybody, well then can God have the feeling of having physical attractions to someone? Well, obviously no. If God, God wouldn't have a physical attraction to someone. Like he wouldn't be horny in that sort of way. But I think it's possible to kind of modify it a little bit to say, instead of God having all the feelings of all people, rather he experiences everyone's pains and pleasures, but he doesn't himself have those pains and pleasures. So like there's still a distinction between God and those feelings, but he still has those feelings. So I think it's possible, but I think it's a little tricky, depending on how you define it. But yeah. How would you understand Genesis with an idealist framework? Well, I'm not a concordist, so I wouldn't say that Genesis actually says anything about. Sorry, Genesis would not say anything about how reality was created per se. So I would accept John Walton's view, which is basically that Genesis is talking about functions rather than material origins. But if I was to apply concordism to that, I would simply say that perhaps God thought the universe into existence, right? So when you read Genesis 1:1, when it says that God created the heavens and the earth, that would probably refer to God thinking the universe into existence or thinking the earth into existence. And that's kind of how God created everything. So again, I'm not a concordist, so I wouldn't try to compare Genesis with science or metaphysics, but yeah, that's kind of how I would think of it. So okay, do you have any arguments that you think can be used to show the common sense of idealism? I do. I have a few of them. I'm not going to present them here, but there is one argument. Let me actually give me like 30 seconds and I'll be back with some of the arguments that I'm going to go over a little bit. Hold on. Okay, so I printed these out because I wanted to present every argument that I come up with. There's different ways you can think about it. So let me just present. Actually, I'm going to present just one of them. What I think would be an interesting kind of common sense way of thinking about idealism. So, premise 1: that which lies within consciousness is what is most certain. Premise 2: the first principles of philosophy must reflect what is most certain. Conclusion: therefore, the first principles of philosophy must reflect that which lies within consciousness. Straightforward. Premise 3: the standpoint of idealism is that which lies within consciousness. Therefore, the first principles of philosophy must reflect the standpoint of idealism. Now, that's a pretty simple, straightforward argument, and it shows that idealism makes sense if you think of it as epistemically from a bottom-up approach. So if what we can be most certain of is consciousness, then why not just say that everything kind of builds off from that consciousness, right? Because if we're going to talk about things that are not in consciousness or things that are outside consciousness, then there's always going to be this epistemic problem with trying to get from a mental thing to a physical thing, or at least justifying physical things. So I think that's one argument, but it basically shows that when you understand how idealism works, that it can be pretty much common sense, right? Because if we're talking about experiences, obviously experiences are something that is makes sense. So yeah, I might do a video on that because there's a few other arguments that I've been kind of compiling together. So again, I'm working on newer arguments for idealism that could work, but yeah, I think there's a way you could make idealism common sense. So okay, so let me get to the next question. There's a lot of comments. I didn't think there would be this many people. Let's see here. Okay, here's another question. Hopefully I didn't skip anything, but I'm gonna go to this one. Okay, if we live in an idealistic universe, why would God give us such a strong belief in the mind-independent and materialist universe? Well, actually, this belief in at least a mind-independent universe wasn't really common before the Enlightenment. So I think the materialistic way of thinking that we're thinking of nowadays actually didn't exist prior to the Enlightenment. Because before this, there was also what's called classical theism was very popular. So people before the Enlightenment would think of the universe not in terms of materialism, but rather in terms of teleology and how there's causes and effects, but that these have a purpose. Like there's a purpose to why things occur. Now, of course, that's not an idealistic way of thinking about the universe, but I wouldn't say that materialism is an intuition that God gave us, but rather I think it's something that was a byproduct of the Enlightenment. And unfortunately now it's, pretty dominant within our culture. So yeah, I think that I don't think God would actually give us intuition. I think it's more of an intuition from culture rather than God himself giving us the intuition. So yeah. Okay, let me get to the next question. Okay, so are you familiar with Bostrom simulation hypothesis? Do you think nested dream worlds could be a possibility? Yes, I do think that nested dream worlds could be a possibility. Now, the thing with, I want to point out the simulation hypothesis, it depends on what we're talking about. So if we're talking about this universe being within a computer simulation, I don't think it would work. I don't think it's possible. And the reason why, there's actually two reasons why. Number one, I don't think that you can reduce consciousness to computation. And number two, even if we're in a computer simulation, you're going to run into a qubit unpacking problem. So basically, if you try to unpack all the qubits within our universe and try to simulate that on a classical computer, you're going to have exponential slowdown. So in order to actually do that, you would have to say that the computer itself, the computer that simulated us, is itself a simulation. Because if we're a simulation, then they would also have to be a simulation because they run by the same physics. And so basically you get like this infinite regress of like simulations upon simulations building off from each other. And you're just never going to actually get a material computer to produce universes. So I think that's the issue. And then as far as dream worlds go, I actually do think that we are in some sort of dream world. Because I do, like, I emphasize this in my current series, that there's actually different levels of reality. So we have the physical plane, then we have the mental plane, the spiritual plane. There's also the astral plane, though the astral plane is not a plane in and of itself. It's more of a plane that's within the mental and spiritual planes. But, there's different ways of kind of describing how it all works. So I would agree that we kind of are in a nested dream world already. It's just that I think it's all connected. So basically, while it's true that you can describe different levels of reality, they're all within the same reality, even though there's different planes within that reality. So yeah. Okay, how do you feel about divine simplicity, given that you said that you hold to the essence-energy distinction to be ontological, which could... Okay. So divine simplicity, I don't hold to Aquinas' view of simplicity. I would probably hold to a modified simplicity. So I would say that God is perfection, but there's still distinctions within his nature that distinguishes like omniscience from omnipotence and so on and so forth. So I would say that there's like a distinct... I think the simplicity that Aquinas talked about, I don't think works. But I do think you can kind of modify simplicity to make it better. If you want to see kind of what this modified divine simplicity would be, you can read Joshua Rajmin's book. Let me get it real quick. This one. And he basically argues, he doesn't talk about simplicity too much, but he does mention that God would be a simple being. So yeah, I think it's a doctrine that can be held, but it would have to be a modified divine simplicity. So, okay. What do you think is the best way to answer the problem of evil, and do you think atheism is hopeless and meaningless? Okay, so the problem of evil is the biggest objection to theism. Now, I'm going to answer the second question first. So under atheism, I'm not sure... Here's the thing with the problem of evil. Okay, and this is my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, but I don't think the problem of evil can be explained that well under theism or naturalism. So I think the only way you can really solve the problem of evil is if you have to understand the Christian message, right? And this is kind of what inspiring philosophy does. But you also have to understand the other aspect, which is the metaphysics of what evil is, right? And if you want to kind of get details on this, you can watch my video. It's called Fallen State and Salvation Metaphysics. And it's in my Quantum Hermeticism series, number 8. Basically, what I show is that evil is contingent on good, but there's a way you can actually metaphysically explain what evil is. And I think evil is just the fallen state, right? So that, like, if you really want to describe what evil is, it's literally just the fallen state. Like, that's all it is. You can't really separate evil from the fallen state. Like, they're one and the same. And I think the only way you can actually escape from evil would be from salvation. And I also believe that because I'm an idealist, I would also say that because evil exists... Sorry, someone's trying to call me and I had to hang up. But basically, I would say that since evil exists within the mental inner plane, then it would reflect within our actual physical world, and therefore that's why there's natural evil as well. I didn't really talk about this much in the video, but if you there's like a little portion of it where I kind of talk about how if you get out of the fallen state, and if everybody does that, if everyone's like in an unfallen state, then that would naturally get rid of natural evil. So I think in order to solve the problem of evil, you have to really understand the Christian message, right? Which is what IP does. But you also have to understand, the metaphysics behind what evil is and what it causes. And that's kind of what I'm doing now that's what I somewhat did in my video. But I think I could probably do another video kind of go in more detail. But yeah, that's kind of what I think. But okay, we got into an hour. However, I'm not going to stop here because there's actually there's still a lot of questions that I want to get through. So I'm gonna leave for 1 minute, get something to drink, and then I'll actually probably bring my drink in here because I'm gonna take like a little 1 minute break, and then I'll be back. But keep these questions going, guys. I'll try to answer as many as I can. So I'll be right back. All right, I'm back, guys. Sorry, I had to get my drink because still a lot more questions we have to get through. But okay, so what was the next question? All right, what do you think of Keith Ward's view on idealism and Christianity? I think his views are pretty accurate. The only thing I would disagree with him on would probably be the Trinity. So I wouldn't actually agree with him because he takes the view that the Trinity that God is not a Trinity, which I would not agree with at all. But yeah, that's kind of my perspective. So I do think he's correct, but there's also a lot of other things that I would not agree with him on. So yeah. Okay. So what do you think of Sagan's belief that human beings are a collection of water? I think it's true, but again, I'm not sure how that would be relevant to. I'm not sure how that would be relevant to theism, but I think that's true. I don't know. Yeah, so I mean, if it brought you out of atheism, that's great, but I'm not sure how it's relevant to belief in God. But yeah. Okay, are you familiar with JP? He is a small YouTuber that is trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness. Yeah. Well, actually, okay, so I never heard of him, but I do think that panpsychism doesn't have a hard problem of consciousness. This is kind of the one of the points that David Chalmers brings up, that you can solve the hard problem of consciousness if you don't assume reductionism. So basically, the hard problem only applies to reductionism, but it does not apply to, let's say, panpsychism, for example. Now, of course, panpsychism has a problem of its own, which is, the combination problem. But still, the hard problem of consciousness is not a problem for panpsychism, but then panpsychism has a new problem, which is the combination problem. So yeah. Okay, let me get to, what is your political philosophy? Do you lean more to the left or the right? My political philosophy, I'm a centrist. So I would agree with a lot of things on the left and the right. I don't know exactly where I would be on the political spectrum. I've taken a few tests, but I think it's kind of hard because some of the questions are like very biased, and so I would probably call myself a centrist, an independent centrist. I don't really take side. I try to be as honest as I can in politics, and so yeah. But it is what it is. But I don't know where I would lean more towards. Probably most likely the right. On most probably. probably on most issues, I would lean towards the right, but not the far right. But then other issues, I would lean left wing. So it really depends. But yeah. Let's see. All right, I'm gonna, since there's no more questions directed to me, I'm gonna see if there's anything I skipped. Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna see if I make sure I answered all the questions, because what do you think of? Okay. I think I answered most of the questions, so. All right. So we've gone over an hour. If there's any more questions you guys would like me to answer, bring them right ahead. Otherwise, I'm gonna cancel the stream. But I think it's a good question. We have a new question. Okay, perfect. Okay, doesn't idealism have a different view of the afterlife than dualism? Since in idealism we don't leave the body because it just exists in mind. Well, no, I think they actually would. At least the experiences that you have would probably be the same. I would assume. So there's actually, like, in terms of the afterlife, I wouldn't see really a distinction between an idealist and a dualist view, except the only difference would be that the body itself is within the mind. So basically the body is mental. So I would say probably a better analogy would think of it as a dream. So like when you die, you basically go, you die in this dream world and you go to the next dream world. And that's pretty much how it works. I mean, I don't know how else to really explain it. I guess that's the simplest way I can explain it. So I don't think there's really a distinction there, but yeah, but the thing though is I don't know what the afterlife is going to be like. I assume we're probably going to have some psychedelic experience and then we go to purgatory or something. I don't know, but yeah, so yeah. Okay. It is philosopher Malpass thinks that God cannot perform an action unless he is in time, but he's described as timeless. Well, that would only be an objection if God was timeless. So there are some philosophers like Richard Swinburne, and also I think there's another Christian philosopher. I forgot his name. He was recently in a discussion with, he's a neoclassical theist. He argues against classical theism. So he actually argues against a timeless God. But basically he argues that God is within time. And then before creation, he was outside time. I'm not sure. Yeah, I agree with you that it's a problem. So I would agree that it's contradictory. But I think a better way to maybe think of it would be that time actually depends on God. So you can't experience time unless you have experiences. But yeah. Okay. What do you think about Ed Feiser's objection to idealism? I don't. Yeah, I would I would disagree with his objection. Let me see what docetism actually is, because I never even heard of that term. I'm gonna look it up. Hold on. Okay, yeah. It's I think it's a straw man. I think it's straw man right off the bat, because idealism does not deny that bodies, physical bodies exist. Rather, we say that physical bodies themselves are mental. So it would not apply to docetism because there's no dualism involved. So yeah, I think it's a terrible objection in my view, but whatever. Okay, are you a Molinist? Yes, I am a Molinist. I think there are a few issues with Molinism, but I think I am a Molinist. I still have to really look deep into it because I think Trent Dowdery has brought up some good objections. But yeah, I am a Molinist, so I think it can somewhat help in the problem of evil. But I think, yeah. So, how do you answer the problem of divide hiddenness? Well, again, it's gonna be a long answer. I'll try my best to kind of shorten it. But basically, I think divine hiddenness is not successful. And the reason why is I think it's really similar to the argument from religious experience. So basically, just because you have a lack of experience of God, or that you do have experience of God, that's not going to really do that's not really tell us anything about whether God exists, right? Just because you lack an experience of God, it doesn't do anything. Just because you experience God is not going to prove anything. So I think it's based on subjectivity, and I also think the atheist philosopher that kind of formulates the actual argument, I think one of the premises is false, which is that there are reasonable non-belief. I don't think there's any reasonable belief at all. I think that people are very biased. I think that people have cognitive biases, and so because I don't think there's any real reasonable people to begin with, because we all have biases, then the hiddenness argument isn't successful. And I just think that it's too subjective, because what about people that have had religious experience? Well, obviously for them, from a subjective point of view, they don't lack hiddenness, they don't have hiddenness. So yeah. But again, that deserves a whole video in and of itself. But yeah. I wanted to thank you. Just keep those questions coming. You can also email me at massapologist if you have any more questions you want to ask. I'll try my best to answer them. But yeah. Okay, what was the most fascinating thing you found in your study? Okay. So I want to answer this, but because I haven't done a video on that principle yet, I guess I won't spoil too much, okay? But actually, okay, I'll tell what you guys probably already know, but then I'll also leave out the part that I'm gonna save until I actually do the last video. Okay, so I think the most fascinating thing that I found is how it actually helps us to clarify the fallen state and how you get out of the fallen state. So basically, when you look at the principle of gender, and again, I still have to do a video on this, so this is kind of I'm gonna have to spoil a little bit here. Basically, the idea is that the marriage between God and man is what gets someone out of the fallen state. So again, you have to look at Hermeticism as a whole, and then once you apply the principle of gender to it, then you can actually understand why there has to be marriage between God and man in order for there to be, in order for the fallen state to be fixed. And I'm going to get into that in my last video of my series. So right now I'm working on the 14th installment, and then I have to do a video on the principle of mentalism. And then the last video, I'm going to actually explain how it all fits together and how people are saved from the fallen state, like the mechanism by which it works. Again, I'm not going to spoil it here, but basically the idea is that in order to escape from the fallen state, what I found is like once you apply the principle of gender to the system, then the marriage between God and man is what fixes the fallen state. So again, that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to have to explain it more. I'm going to explain it more when the video comes out, but that's the most fascinating thing that I've found. And it actually provides a pretty good argument for Christianity. So, okay, you didn't malpass. Oh, did I skip it? That's weird. Hold on, let me go back. Oh, I think, Yeah. So I think my answer to that question would be that I do agree with him that it is contradictory. So yeah, I think it is contradictory. So, what's your day job? How do you find the time, energy to study? Right now, I actually don't have a job. I'm getting unemployed because okay. So here's the thing with my job. I used to work at a fast food restaurant, but I quit because they mistreated me, and a lot of my other coworkers quit as well. But I find the time and the energy when I can. Right now, I'm getting more money from unemployment, so I decided I'm not going to be working right now because I make more money from the government than I do actually working. So yeah, but I'm hoping that once the $600+ goes away, then I'll start looking for a job again. But right now, there's no point in me finding a job if I can make more money not working. So okay. My view is that God is the mind of all reality, lives in both physical and heavenly realms of two universes that can interact. What is your view? I would agree with you. Actually, that kind of is my view in a way. The heavenly realm is a little different than our realm, so I would say the heavenly realm it contains all the universes by which there is no fallen state. So I do agree that there are other universes, but I think the other universes that exist that are not in the fallen state are basically universes that have been saved and that they have a high enough vibration by which they would be considered perfect worlds. If you want to kind of get a little more detail, I did a video on this. It's called, again, just go back to fallen state and salvation metaphysics. And I explained in that video basically that there are other realities and other universes that exist and that they're at a high enough vibration that they would be considered perfect worlds. So, yeah. Okay. Do you think math points to the belief that God exists? I think there's a good argument. I wouldn't say it's the best argument you could make, but I would say there's a reasonable case that math can point to God. So, yeah. Have you seen Done? Yes, I love that movie. That's one of my favorite movies because it literally, the movie Inception is basically a good analogy for my metaphysics. Basically that we're in the dream world and that there's different dreams that exist. And so, yeah, I do like that movie. So yeah. And then what are your books? How do you find the book you want? Well, basically, I go on Amazon and I look at recommendations, and then I also look at the Bible, the bibliographies within books to kind of get their recommendations, and then I get whatever I think I need to read on. So that's kind of how I do it. But yeah, I think, yeah. Again, I want to warn you that getting these books that's not cheap. Like I've spent $400 just on books relating to New Testament studies. So, it's pretty intense, the amount of, you have to have money in order to at least get the hard copies. So yeah. Now, the reason why I stack it like that is because it can fit more, because if I did it the other way where it's all like showing titles, then I wouldn't be able to fit as many books in my cabinet, or so that's why I have to stack it up like that. But okay, there was an apparent statistics that came out saying that believers get into philosophy religion as to prove God. Apparently, more philosophy makes one an atheist. What do you think? It would depend. There's been a lot of philosophers that have actually gone to God because it's like, for example, Edward Pfizer used to be an atheist and he converted to Catholicism because of the argument. So I think those statistics are very biased. I wouldn't really say I think, I don't know, because I don't really buy those statistics, because especially if you go into like philosophy of religion, for example, I'm not sure how there's more cases of theists becoming atheists within philosophy of religion than there are the opposite. So, yeah. What do you think is the purpose and goal of the Christian life? Sorry, someone keeps on banging the door in my house, so I apologize if there's any like background noises. That's my little brothers. So to answer your question, I think the goal is to basically just have a relationship with God. I think that's really the only goal involved. And we won't really get the full goal until after we die, of course, but I think that's the purpose here, and to spread the gospel and do all that stuff. So yeah, hold on, let me take a little sip. Okay. Because the universe is within God's mind, what is your opinion on dreams? Do they exist within the spirit realm, especially? That's a really good question. Maybe. It's possible that they could actually exist in the spirit realm. Because I do think that our minds have direct access to the spirit realm, because the spirit realm, under my view, would be just the realm of emotions. So I think it's possible. Now, I typically take the view that our dreams are basically a product of our subconscious mind. Now, of course, our subconscious mind is not within the physical plane. It's within the spiritual plane. So in a way, yes, but in another sense, it's a little different. But I wouldn't say that dreams go into the spiritual realm, right? Because they look physical to us. But I would say perhaps dreams are kind of like simulations that our minds create to kind of, or like dreams are kind of like their own mini universes by which our minds interact in. I don't know, but it's complicated, but I think it's possible. Yes. I can't give you a straight answer because I don't really know, but I think it's possible. So when is the next live stream? I'm gonna probably do this again once I reach 1,000 subscribers. So once I get up to 1,000 subscribers, then I'll do a Q&A 1,000 subscriber special, and then I'll do this again to kind of answer your guys' questions. So yeah. What is your, oh wait, hold on, sorry. I skipped the question. Sorry. I'll get to your question, but I have to get to this one first. What type of church do you go to? Right now, I'm just going to a regular Protestant church. It's called Horizon, but I might change it because it's kind of boring there, so we'll see. But yeah, I'm just going to a regular Protestant church right now. So, okay. What is your view on the Nephilim IP? Disagree on this? I'm agnostic on the Nephilim. I think that's a very I think that's a controversial subject. I think there's good arguments on both sides, but ultimately I'm undecided on the whole issue. So, yeah. Hold on, someone's making noise again. Okay, sorry. People keep making noise in my house, and it's annoying the crap out of me. But so yeah, basically, I'm undecided on the Nephilim. So, okay. Do you think homosexuals have the right to marry, and how should you? So I do think that they should have the right to marry, at least from a secular perspective, right? Because atheists get married. I don't really see what the issue is with them getting married. I mean, if atheists can get married, then I don't see why homosexuals can't get married. Now, when it comes to the gospel, I think I think we need to remember, just very briefly, because I do think that it's a very controversial subject. So I think someone's someone's attraction to the same sex should not determine whether or not they're saved, right? So just because you're attracted to the same sex does not mean that you're not saved. I think having some sexual attraction should not define your relationship with God. That's kind of my view, and I think homosexuals can be saved. It's just I think there needs to be made a distinction between someone that's homosexual and being attracted versus actually doing homosexual acts. I think there's a distinction we need to make to point out that it's not sinful to have an attraction to the same sex. What's sinful is the actual act itself. So, yeah. Do you hold the soul of Scripture? I do not hold the soul of Scripture. That is probably my least favorite Protestant doctrine, the soul of Scripture. And I'm not. Yeah, I don't hold to that. So I think there's other revelations from God that are outside Scripture. So perhaps from tradition or something else. But how does the universe get saved if they aren't personal beings? We're actually okay. So basically, what I'm saying is that so I'm not saying that a universe can be saved. What I'm saying is that the minds within the universe can be saved. And then once that happens, then because the universe itself is a reflection of everybody's subconscious mind, then if everybody is in a perfectly unfallen state, then the universe will reflect that unfallen state, and therefore the physical reality will reflect that unfallen state. And so in that case, the universe or universes can be saved in the sense of the conscious minds within those universes being saved. So that's how you would kind of fix the fallen state. Because once you reach a certain vibrational frequency, then eventually you will get to a point where it becomes a perfect world. So, but yeah, again, you have to watch a video on fallen state and salvation metaphysics. But yeah. So, okay, what is your least favorite argument for theism, and why? Well, actually, I think there's a lot of ontological arguments that I think work, but I think my least favorite argument would probably be more of the moral argument. So, I don't think there's any successful moral argument. I think there's only like maybe one or two that might work. But all the others, like William and Craig's version, doesn't work, I don't think. So in terms of like the taxonomy of arguments for God, I think moral arguments are arguments that I don't think work at all for the most part. So, and then of course, ontological arguments are a little different. So I would say that moral arguments don't work, most of them. The vast majority of them don't work. The vast majority of ontological arguments don't work. But some of them do, a good portion of them do. Now, once you get to like other arguments, like arguments from religious experience, then it gets a little better. Then, contingency arguments, I think, are the ones that really work. I think most contingency arguments, I think, do work for the most part. So, and teleological argument as well, those type of arguments, I think, work. So, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next question. Hopefully I didn't skip anybody. I'm going to take my time because I'm going to take a little break for a little bit, and then I'll try to get to the last questions before. Okay. All right. I'm gonna. Oh, sorry. That wasn't okay. Oh wait. Oh, okay. Since mind body, I want. Hey man, I agree with you. I think it's good. I think everybody should lift weights. I don't care if you're an idealist or a materialist. I think you should lift weights. So I would agree. Even if you're an eliminativist, I think you should lift weights. I think it's just healthy for you. So I like that. I like that perspective. Okay, let me get to the next question. Okay, what do you think about rationality rules and GM? GM. I'm trying to remember who. I think GM, genetically modified skeptic. Well, actually, I think they're at the same level, but I think most of their objections don't work, though some of them do. Like, for example, I did a response video to rationality rules. It's called Rationality Rules Fails to Debunk Free Will, and I basically refute his main argument in that video. So I think most of their arguments against theistic arguments don't work, but I'm hoping that they can get a little better in their responses. So it really depends, but yeah. What do you think of presupposition? I already answered this earlier, but basically I don't think it works. I actually answered this like in the beginning of the stream, but yeah, I don't think it works. So okay. And reformed epistemology. Well, reformed epistemology, I don't think that works either. There's quite different reasons why I don't think it works. But I think the only way that reformed epistemology could work is if you look at it from a probabilistic perspective. So you have to. So basically, I think you would have to apply Bayes' theorem to reformed epistemology to actually understand it. But yeah. All right. So actually, guys, we're an hour and a half. So I'm gonna get to the last questions, and then I'm gonna close the stream. Because I got other stuff to do. But it was nice, great questions, guys. I mean, it's interesting. Okay, so yeah, this will be my last question. So if you have any more questions, I'm sorry, guys, I can't get to it today, but it's nice talking to you guys. All right, so we got a question from this programmer. Says, you are like Richard Swinburne. Even he thinks the moral argument don't work. I disagree. Okay, well, that's fine. Again, I think there are certain moral arguments that do work. It's just not that many. Like, again, Craig's argument I don't think works. But I think a really good moral argument that I think does work would be Inspiring Philosophy's argument. I think what I would call a moral contingency argument would work. So basically, if you argue that you need some moral foundation, then I think that sort of argument could work. But I think any other argument is just begging the question. So what do you think is wrong with Craig's formulation of the ontological? Well, again, we have to understand, I think, okay, so the ontological argument is, yeah, this is going to be the last question that I'm going to answer. But I think the ontological argument, it's very limited in scope. So it only shows that God is logical. It doesn't actually demonstrate that a God exists, but rather it's possible that a God exists. Now, I also take the view that if God exists, then he would have to exist in all possible worlds. So the question is God possible? Like, is it possible that a God exists? And I think if it's possible, then you can show through S5 logic that God would have to exist in all possible worlds. Because again, if God's perfection, then he would have to exist in the modal sense. So yeah, I think you have to understand the limitations. If you can just show that it's possible that a God exists, then I think it works. So, all right, guys. Well, that'll be it for today. Thanks for the questions. I really appreciate it. This is my first Q&A session, so I haven't done it in a while. But if you guys have any more questions, you can either email me. I'm also going to be doing this again when once I reach 1,000 subscribers, then I'll do a Q&A session again to kind of answer any questions. But again, if you have any more questions, just email me at massapologist@gmail.com. and I will try to answer your questions the best I can. But anyways, I'm going to end the stream now. So it was nice talking to you guys, nice seeing you guys, and have a nice day.